There are enemies who will do anything to spy on you, but few are foolish enough to crawl into a basement full of skunks in mating season like my neighbor Karen. Man, I can still hear her screams like they happened yesterday. Actually, they did happen yesterday. If you're watching this from your bathroom or while eating dinner, you might want to save it for later, trust me. And if you're watching this from someone's basement right now, comment below where you're watching from so I can call the police to help you out. My name is Finn Scott, and 6 months ago I moved to Ashland Meadows, a quiet suburban neighborhood with perfectly manicured lawns and an active HOA that governed everything from the height of your grass to the color of your mailbox. I'm a freelance wildlife photographer and YouTube content creator specializing in documenting the lives of misunderstood creatures. The move was supposed to give me easier access to the nearby nature preserve while still being close enough to civilization. Little did I know that the most dangerous predator I'd encounter wouldn't be in the wilderness, but right next door, in the form of a 52-year-old woman named Karen Caldwell, the president of our neighborhood's homeowners association. I first met Karen during my second week in Ashland Meadows, while I was unloading camera equipment from my car. She approached with a clipboard and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said, extending a manicured hand. "I'm Karen Caldwell, HOA president. I just wanted to personally deliver your copy of our community guidelines. There are 73 pages, but I recommend paying special attention to sections 4 through 17 regarding property appearance." Before I could properly introduce myself, she was already scanning my front yard with narrowed eyes. "Your grass is about half an inch too high, and that native plant garden you're starting needs proper approval. The form is on page 42. Then she was off, power walking to her next victim, leaving me with a heaviness in my chest that felt like I'd just been inspected by a prison warden rather than greeted by a neighbor. Not everyone in Ashland Meadows was like Karen, thankfully. I soon met Mrs. Patel, a 70-year-old Indian-American woman who had lived in the neighborhood for 3 decades. She brought me homemade samosas and stories about the community. "Be careful with that one," she warned after I mentioned my interaction with Karen. "She's had 4 families leave the neighborhood this year alone. Nobody stands up to her because she knows how to make your life miserable if you cross her. Used to be a mid-level manager at Evergreen Development until they fired her for manipulating environmental reports to fast-track high-property development projects. Her husband divorced her too. Poor man couldn't handle her controlling nature. Now she runs our HOA like her personal kingdom." For the first few months, I managed to stay mostly under Karen's radar, receiving only the occasional violation notice for trivial matters. That all changed one rainy April evening when I discovered a family of injured skunks seeking shelter under my back porch. As someone passionate about wildlife rehabilitation, I couldn't just leave them out in the elements, especially with one of the adults limping badly and 2 juveniles looking malnourished. I carefully moved them to my basement, which I had converted into a temporary animal care facility, complete with proper ventilation, separate areas for different species, and all the necessary permits. I called my friend Dr. Samantha Lewis, a wildlife biologist at the local university, to come take a look at them the next day. Caring for skunks isn't for the faint of heart, especially during mating season, but it's a labor of love I've embraced over my years as a wildlife rehabilitator. That first night, I set up a comfortable enclosure in the far corner of my basement, a space I'd specifically designed with proper ventilation, temperature control, and easy-to-clean surfaces for exactly this kind of emergency rescue. The adult female, whom I later named Marigold for her yellowish stripe pattern, had a badly injured back leg that looked like it might have been caught in some kind of trap. The 2 juveniles seemed primarily suffering from malnutrition and mild dehydration, their ribs visible beneath their glossy black fur. My initial examination was done with extreme caution. Despite what many believe, skunks don't spray unless they feel threatened, and they usually give warning signs first, stamping their front feet, raising their tails, and even doing a little warning handstand before releasing their potent defense mechanism. I spoke to them in low, gentle tones as I worked, explaining what I was doing before each touch or movement. "I'm just gonna check this leg now, girl. Easy does it. You're safe here." There's something therapeutic about talking to animals this way. It calms them and me. That first night involved cleaning the mother's wound, thankfully not infected yet, administering subcutaneous fluids to all 3 for hydration, and preparing a specialized diet that would help the juveniles regain strength without causing digestive upset. I set up a heating pad under half of their enclosure, allowing them to regulate their temperature by moving on or off it as needed. By the time I finished, it was nearly 3 in the morning, but seeing them settled and finally relaxed was worth the lost sleep. Over the next few days, my daily routine revolved around their care. Morning checkups included temperature readings, wound cleaning for Marigold, and fresh food and water. I mixed special formula for the juveniles, who despite being old enough to eat solid food, still benefited from the extra nutrition of formula supplements. Midday involved environmental enrichment. Skunks are intelligent creatures who get bored easily, so I would bring in different textures to explore, like strips of fleece, smooth river stones, and even shallow trays of water with floating toys. Evenings were for major mealtime, another round of medications, and updating my detailed care log with observations about their progress. By the end of the first week, the juveniles had already put on noticeable weight, their eyes brighter and their movements more energetic. They'd start playing when I entered the room, rolling and mock fighting with each other. Marigold's leg was healing nicely, though she would likely always have a slight limp. What I hadn't anticipated, though, was how quickly they'd settle into mating season behaviors. The male juvenile, not quite mature but getting there, began showing typical courtship behaviors, circling the enclosure in figure-8 patterns and making soft clicking sounds that echoed through my basement. The challenge with rehabilitating skunks isn't just their potential to spray, it's making sure they don't become habituated to humans. For these animals to survive once released, they needed to maintain a healthy fear of people. So, despite the temptation to comfort them with pets and cuddles, especially when the juveniles would look up at me with their curious dark eyes, I maintained a professional distance. I wore the same neutral-colored clothing during feedings, minimized talking except for necessary soothing, and always approached their enclosure from the same direction to reduce surprise. The ventilation system I'd installed in my basement was state-of-the-art, with charcoal filters specifically designed to neutralize skunk odor. Under normal circumstances, it worked perfectly, but as Sam had warned, mating season changed everything. No filtration system on Earth could completely contain the powerful musk that skunks produce during this time. Not quite the same as a defensive spray, but pungent nonetheless. Despite my best efforts, a faint, musky odor began seeping upstairs into my living space, and occasionally, when the wind was just right, into my yard. I doubled up on air purifiers and added enzyme sprays around the basement perimeter, but it was like trying to contain a fog with a butterfly net. That's when Karen started noticing, and my peaceful existence in Ashland Meadows began to unravel. Sam arrived early the following morning, examining the skunks with expert hands. "The good news is they're going to be fine with some care," she said, gently placing one of the juveniles back in the makeshift enclosure. "The bad news? They're entering mating season." She gave me a sympathetic look. "That means their scent glands are in overdrive. Even with your ventilation system, you might want to warn your neighbors about potential odors." I was about to respond when a movement outside the basement window caught my attention. There, crouched awkwardly behind a hydrangea bush, was Karen, smartphone in hand, clearly taking photos of us through the window. Our eyes met briefly before she ducked away and power walked back to her house, her floral print dress fluttering behind her like a battle flag. "That's Karen," I explained to Sam with a sigh. "The HOA president who thinks she's running a military base instead of a suburban neighborhood." Sam laughed, but her expression quickly turned serious. "Finn, you have all the proper wildlife rehabilitation permits, right? Because if she reports you..." I nodded, pulling out my official state documentation. "Everything's in order. I've been doing this for years. But something tells me Karen isn't going to care about legal permits if she thinks she can finally nail me for something." Sure enough, less than 24 hours later, I found an official HOA violation notice taped to my front door, citing unauthorized housing of wild animals and demanding the removal of the skunks within 48 hours or face a substantial fine. The notice also mentioned a mandatory attendance at the upcoming HOA meeting to address my repeated and willful violations of community standards. I called Sam immediately. "This is ridiculous," she said after I read her the notice. "Moving injured skunks during mating season could be dangerous for them and anyone handling them. Besides, you're legally protected by state wildlife conservation laws." I knew she was right, but I also knew this was just the beginning of Karen's crusade. The HOA meeting was held in the community center, a small building with too much beige and not enough ventilation. I arrived with Sam in tow, armed with documentation and a presentation about wildlife rehabilitation. Karen sat at the center of a long table at the front of the room, flanked by other board members who all seemed to share her enthusiasm for conformity, particularly a middle-aged man named Rod Jenkins, who kept stealing glances at Karen with puppy dog admiration. I noticed about 20 residents scattered throughout the chairs, most looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Karen gavelled the meeting to order with unnecessary force, immediately launching into a speech about community standards and property values before specifically targeting me. Mr. Scott has decided that our rules don't apply to him, she announced, pointing an accusatory finger in my direction. He has turned his home into a wildlife sanctuary without board approval, currently housing animals that pose a significant health and safety risk to our community. She clicked a remote, and suddenly, the blurry photos she had taken through my basement window appeared on a projector screen. These are skunks, people. Dangerous, disease-carrying, foul-smelling creatures that could escape at any moment and infest our beautiful neighborhood. Studies show that homes near wildlife nuisances can lose up to 20% of their value. I noticed several homeowners shifting uncomfortably in their seats, eyes darting between Karen and me as if watching a tennis match where their retirement savings were at stake. When I finally got my turn to speak, I calmly explained the situation. How the skunks were injured, how I had all the proper permits, how the rehabilitation was temporary, and most importantly, how state law protected wildlife rehabilitation activities even in HOA-governed communities. Sam backed me up with her credentials, essentially explaining that Karen's demands would force me to violate actual laws, not just HOA regulations. These animals will be released back into the wild once they're healthy and mating season has passed, Sam concluded. It's the humane and legal approach. I could see Karen's face reddening as her narrative crumbled under the weight of actual expertise and law. In a last-ditch effort, Karen called for an immediate vote on whether to force the removal of the skunks, but even her loyal board members seemed hesitant after Sam's presentation. Perhaps, one elderly board member suggested, we could give Mr. Scott some additional time, provided there are no odor issues affecting the neighbors. I quickly agreed to this compromise, promising to ensure no nuisance to the community. The matter was tabled with a 2-week extension, much to Karen's visible frustration. As people filed out of the meeting, I overheard Karen whispering furiously to Rod, "I know this guy is hiding something. Nobody just cares for stinking animals out of the goodness of their heart. I'm going to find evidence and get him out of here." I didn't know what Karen was planning, but it was clear the battle had just begun and my skunks were gradually recovering, along with their distinctive, attractive scent. In the days following the HOA meeting, I began noticing Karen's increasingly bizarre presence around my property. She would power walk past my house at odd hours, sometimes stopping to take notes or pictures. She'd be gardening in her front yard at dawn, positioned perfectly to observe my comings and goings. Once, I even caught her accidentally wandering into my backyard, claiming she was looking for her non-existent cat. Following Sam's advice, I installed security cameras around my property and was shocked to discover that Karen had been attempting to peek through my basement windows almost daily, clearly trying to gather more evidence against me. I decided to confront her directly one morning as she was measuring the height of my grass with an actual ruler. "Karen, we need to talk about your surveillance of my home," I said calmly. "It's becoming harassment." Her reaction was immediate and explosive. "How dare you accuse me of harassment?" she shrieked, loud enough for several neighbors to peek out their windows. "I am performing my duties as HOA president. If anyone is harassing anyone, it's you harassing this community with your wild animals and disregard for our rules." She then reached into her designer purse and pulled out what appeared to be a letter from a prestigious law firm, threatening to sue me for defamation, invasion of privacy, and causing damage to the HOA's reputation, with damages listed at $200,000. Though I suspected the letter might be fake, the legal pressure still worried me. The very next day, I received a flurry of new HOA violation notices. Everything from unapproved paint color on garden shed, I didn't even have a garden shed, to excessive bird activity at bird feeder. It was clear that Karen was trying to drown me in petty violations, hoping I'd either give up and remove the skunks, or better yet, from her perspective, move out entirely. I invited Mrs. Patel over for tea to get her perspective on the situation. "She's done this before," Mrs. Patel confirmed, sipping her chai. "The Hendersons last year, the Garcias before them. She finds something to target them for, then buries them in violations until they can't take it anymore and sell their homes. The strange thing is, the same development company keeps buying these properties. Evergreen Development, the very company she used to work for before they fired her for falsifying environmental reports." This revelation caught my attention. "So you think there's a connection?" I asked. Mrs. Patel nodded sagely. "There's always been rumors that Karen gets kickbacks for every property Evergreen acquires in our neighborhood. They've been trying to buy enough homes to build a commercial complex, but they need at least 60% of the properties. They're getting close. The pieces were starting to fit together. Karen's aggressive enforcement wasn't just about control. It was potentially part of a larger scheme to force out homeowners who wouldn't sell willingly. Her background in real estate and history of manipulating environmental reports explained her motivation for pushing unwanted residents out of the neighborhood. That night, my security cameras captured something disturbing. Karen and Rod attempting to jimmy open my garage door before being frightened away by a neighbor's barking dog. I reported the incident to Officer Joel Turner, our local police officer, but without clear evidence of their intentions, there wasn't much he could do besides file a report. The next day, I received an official-looking notice, supposedly from the local court, summoning me to appear for keeping dangerous animals and multiple HOA violations. After checking with the courthouse, I discovered this was a fraudulent document, another intimidation tactic from Karen. This only strengthened my resolve to stand my ground. With Sam's help, I began researching HOA regulations and discovered that many of the rules Karen had been enforcing were either outdated or had been amended years ago without proper notification to residents. We also thoroughly reviewed wildlife protection laws, confirming that Karen's demands were directly contradicting state statutes. Armed with this knowledge, I organized a small gathering of friendly neighbors, including Mrs. Patel and several others who had experienced Karen's harassment. We shared our experiences and decided to confront Karen as a united front at the next HOA meeting. Meanwhile, Karen and Rod grew increasingly bold in their surveillance of my home, even attempting to sneak into my backyard at night to find evidence. On one occasion, they nearly got caught by my security system but managed to escape just in time. The stakes were escalating, and I needed a plan to protect both myself and the recovering skunks. That's when Sam suggested something brilliant. If Karen wants evidence about the skunks so badly, maybe we should let her experience them up close and personal. I recognized that mischievous look in Sam's eyes. She had a plan, and with the skunks becoming increasingly fragrant in mating season, Karen might get more than she was looking for. At the next HOA meeting, the atmosphere was tense, as I and my small coalition of neighbors openly challenged Karen's authority. We presented evidence of her selective enforcement, failure to hold annual elections, and unilateral rule changes without proper votes. Karen became increasingly agitated as her power was questioned, finally issuing an ultimatum. Either I removed the skunks immediately, or she would resign as HOA president. "Is that a promise?" one brave neighbor called out, drawing nervous laughter from the crowd. Karen's face turned a dangerous shade of red, but she maintained her composure enough to adjourn the meeting. I agreed that the skunks would be released back into the wild, but only when they had fully recovered and mating season had ended, which might take a few more weeks. Karen reluctantly accepted but set a hard deadline of no more than 2 weeks. However, that night, my security camera captured Karen and Rod discussing a new plan. She would personally enter my basement while I was away at a university presentation the following evening, gather evidence, and call animal control to remove the skunks themselves. "I'm not waiting another 2 weeks, Karen said to Rod in the shadowy footage. "Tomorrow night, when he's at that presentation at the university, I'm going into that basement and recording everything. Then we'll see if the animal lover still wants to stay in this neighborhood." I turned off the video and looked at Sam, who had come over to help monitor the situation. "Do you think Karen really knows what's waiting for her in that basement?" Sam shook her head with an indescribable smile. "No, but I think she's about to learn a lesson, the smelliest lesson of her life." Sam and I spent the next day preparing for Karen's expected break-in. We weren't doing anything illegal, simply rearranging the space so that if anyone entered unauthorized, they would likely startle the skunks and trigger their natural defense mechanism. We made sure all security cameras were functioning properly to document everything. I was officially scheduled to give a presentation at the university that evening, but arranged to cut it short so I could return home and monitor the situation remotely. As predicted, shortly after dusk, my security cameras showed Karen sneaking into my backyard, with Rod providing lookout from the street. She approached my basement door, pulled out what appeared to be a bobby pin, and began working on the lock. After several attempts, she managed to unlock it, an action clearly recorded in high definition by my security system. Karen, equipped with her smartphone to record evidence, crept down into the dark basement and began searching for the skunk. Suddenly, the basement lights turned on, remotely activated by me from my car parked down the street, startling Karen so much that she dropped her phone with a loud clatter. The sudden noise frightened the skunks, and with their defensive instincts triggered, they began spraying their distinctive scent throughout the basement. What happened next was both horrifying and, I have to admit, deeply satisfying to watch on my security feed. The moment the first skunk sprayed, Karen's body went rigid with shock. Her eyes widened to the size of dinner plates, and she let out a gasp that quickly morphed into a guttural scream that I swear could have shattered glass. The first wave of the scent hit her nostrils immediately, a potent, sulfuric compound that skunk experts describe as a mixture of rotten eggs, burning rubber, and garlic that's been left in the sun for a week. But these weren't just any skunks. These were skunks in mating season, when their scent glands produce a cocktail up to 10 times more potent than normal. Karen staggered backward, clawing at her face as if she could physically remove the smell from her skin. Oh my God, she shrieked, her voice reaching a pitch I didn't think possible for a human being. The security camera captured her spinning in a frantic circle, desperately looking for an escape route. But the basement door had automatically locked behind her, a security feature I'd installed after previous break-in attempts. Karen began pounding on the door, mascara streaming down her face in black rivulets as her eyes watered uncontrollably from the chemical assault. Rod, help me!" she screamed, but her loyal sidekick was nowhere to be seen. What Karen didn't realize was that the skunk spray wasn't just in the air, it was on her designer blouse, her carefully styled hair, and her skin. Each movement she made released more of the oily, yellow-tinted spray particles into the air around her, creating a feedback loop of increasing olfactory horror. The skunks, now thoroughly startled, were not done with their defense. The mother skunk, protecting her young, released a second spray directly at Karen's legs, soaking through her white linen pants. The smell was so powerful that it actually came through on the security footage. I had to move away from my laptop screen as I watched from my car. Karen was now bent over, dry heaving, her body convulsing with each wave of the odor. She tried holding her breath, but eventually had to gasp for air, which only brought more of the noxious chemicals into her lungs. I can't breathe," she choked out between coughs. The skunks, sensing her distress, had retreated to the far corner of their enclosure, watching with what I swear looked like satisfaction, as their natural defense mechanism proved devastatingly effective. Karen tried using her scarf as a makeshift mask, but the thin fabric did nothing to filter the overwhelming stench. She crawled toward the basement window, leaving a trail of skunk oil on my concrete floor, desperately trying to find fresh air. But the windows were too small and too high for her to reach. After what seemed like an eternity of watching her suffer, though it was only about 15 minutes, I called Officer Turner to report a break-in at my home. By the time the police arrived, Karen had collapsed into a corner, sobbing uncontrollably, her entire body saturated with a scent so powerful that the responding officers had to put on masks before entering the basement. I called Officer Turner, reporting a break-in at my home. When the police arrived, they rescued a severely stench-soaked Karen from the basement. "Mrs. Caldwell," Officer Turner said while trying not to breathe too deeply, "you're under arrest for criminal trespassing." Karen, with a face red from both anger and humiliation, screamed, "I'll sue all of you, especially you, Scott." But no one could stand close enough to hear her complete the sentence. What Karen didn't know was that this was just the beginning of her odor nightmare, because once you've been sprayed by a skunk, that smell sticks with you for weeks. News of Karen's break-in and subsequent skunking spread throughout the neighborhood like wildfire. Despite being released after posting bail, Karen now had to live with a clinging stench that couldn't be washed away quickly and might persist for weeks. She attempted to counterattack by suing me for keeping dangerous animals, but Sam, as an expert witness, provided documentation proving that skunks aren't dangerous animals and their spraying is merely a natural defense mechanism when threatened. Moreover, the security camera footage clearly showed Karen breaking into my home illegally. To make matters worse for Karen, neighbors began avoiding her because they couldn't stand the smell. HOA meetings had to be conducted online because no one wanted to be in the same room with her. Rod, who had witnessed Karen's skunk attack and subsequent police questioning, began to realize he was being used. When Karen asked him to falsely testify that I had deliberately lured her into the basement, Rod refused and decided to distance himself from her. The fact that even Rod, her most loyal supporter, had turned his back on her left Karen increasingly isolated. Mrs. Patel and other neighbors, inspired by my courage to stand up to Karen, began challenging the unreasonable HOA regulations that Karen had been enforcing. They demanded a new election for the HOA president position. In a desperate final attempt to save face, Karen organized an emergency HOA meeting online to vote on expelling me from the neighborhood for endangering the community. However, the meeting quickly turned into an informal trial of Karen herself, as other neighbors stood up to share their experiences of being harassed and bullied by her over the years. The breakthrough moment came when James Peterson, a wealthy and influential resident who had previously supported Karen due to concerns about property values, unexpectedly requested to speak. James was a retired corporate attorney whose pristine colonial-style home was featured regularly in local home and garden magazines. He had always been Karen's most powerful ally, his concern for maintaining high property values aligning perfectly with her strict enforcement of HOA rules. When his name appeared in the Zoom waiting room, everyone assumed he was there to deliver the final blow to my defense. "I'd like to address the committee and all residents of Ashland Meadows," James began, his deep voice carrying a gravity that immediately silenced the virtual meeting. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and cleared his throat. "I've been a resident here for 17 years, and I've always believed in maintaining certain standards to protect our investments. That's why I've supported many of Karen's initiatives in the past." Karen's face on the screen lit up with smug satisfaction, but it was short-lived. "However," James continued, his tone shifting, "I can no longer remain silent about what I've uncovered." The screen switched to a shared presentation, and suddenly we were looking at a series of emails between Karen and executives at Evergreen Development. These documents came into my possession 3 weeks ago when I was doing due diligence for a potential investment with Evergreen. What I found disturbed me deeply. The emails detailed a systematic plan to devalue properties in Ashland Meadows through aggressive HOA enforcement, creating a climate where homeowners would be more likely to sell at below-market rates. Karen was being paid a 5% commission on each property Evergreen acquired, a substantial kickback scheme that had netted her over $100,000 in the past 2 years alone. "But that's not all," James continued, his voice growing harder. "I also discovered that Karen has been selectively enforcing HOA rules based on whether Evergreen was interested in particular properties." He showed a color-coded map of our neighborhood, where houses targeted for acquisition were subjected to an average of 8 times more violations than others. My house was highlighted in bright red, a prime target. The environmental report falsification that got her fired from Evergreen wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern of unethical behavior that she's brought directly into our community. The virtual meeting erupted in chaos. Neighbors unmuted themselves to express their outrage, demanding answers from Karen, whose face had drained of all color. "How could you do this to us?" shouted Martha Williams, who had received 15 violations in the past month for her front garden. "We trusted you to protect our community." Another screen showed Bernard Cooper, who had reluctantly sold his home last year after endless HOA harassment, his face contorted with rage. "I lost $30,000 on that sale? I had to move away from my grandchildren because you made my life hell." James wasn't finished. He switched to another document, a formal investigation notice from the State Real Estate Commission. "I've already submitted all this evidence to the proper authorities. Karen isn't just facing criminal trespassing charges. She's potentially looking at fraud, conspiracy, and breach of fiduciary duty as an HOA officer." He turned to look directly at the camera, and Evergreen Development has already been served with subpoenas for their role in this scheme. They've withdrawn all pending offers in our neighborhood and are cooperating with investigators to save themselves. Karen finally found her voice, though it came out as a desperate squeak. This is all a misunderstanding. Those emails are taken out of context. James, you've always supported me. Why are you doing this?" Her desperation was palpable, but James remained unmoved. "Because I believe in integrity, Karen. And because when I bought my home here, I swore to be a good neighbor, something you clearly never understood." He turned to address the rest of us. "I apologize to everyone who suffered under this scheme while I remained blind to it, especially to you, Mr. Scott. Your courage in standing up to Karen helped bring this to light." The virtual meeting sat in stunned silence for a moment before erupting into a chorus of demands for Karen's immediate resignation. Officer Turner, who had joined the meeting to discuss the trespassing charges, unmuted himself. "In light of Mr. Peterson's evidence, I should inform everyone that the police department will be expanding our investigation. Mrs. Caldwell, I suggest you retain an attorney." Karen's face, already pale, now took on a greenish hue that had nothing to do with poor lighting and everything to do with the realization that her world was collapsing. And she still smelled overwhelmingly of skunk spray. Officer Turner also joined the meeting, confirming that Karen was facing criminal charges for trespassing and might be further investigated for her connection with the real estate company trying to buy properties in the area, related to her past of being fired for manipulating environmental reports to fast-track real estate development projects. Karen, having completely lost credibility and still reeking terribly, announced her resignation from the HOA presidency. Other HOA members immediately held a vote and chose Mrs. Patel as interim president until an official election could be held. When the computer screen displayed the voting results, 24 votes for Mrs. Patel, 1 vote for Karen, obviously her own, I couldn't help but smile. The battle seemed to be over, but the next morning, while drinking coffee in my garden, I received an unexpected message from Rod. Karen is planning revenge. She says she won't leave you alone until you move out of this neighborhood, and worse, she says she's found something about your past. I frowned. My past? What could Karen possibly dig up from my completely ordinary life? As it turned out, Karen, despite having lost her position in the HOA and still suffering from the clinging skunk odor, wasn't giving up on her vendetta against me. She hired a private investigator to look into my background and discovered that years ago I had been arrested for participating in a protest against an urban development project threatening a natural forest. A small detail I never hid, but also didn't mention when moving in. Karen spread rumors that I was an environmental extremist with a criminal record, trying to damage my reputation in the community. However, instead of turning neighbors against me, this rumor made many curious and even admiring of my commitment to environmental protection. Meanwhile, the skunks had fully recovered and the mating season was coming to an end. Sam and I prepared to release them back into the wild at a nearby conservation area. We organized a small educational event for interested neighbors about the importance of skunks in the ecosystem, and surprisingly, many participated, including children from the neighborhood. Karen, still smelly and increasingly isolated, discovered that the real estate company she had connections with was withdrawing from the project to buy properties in the neighborhood after police investigations into their suspicious activities began, particularly when they found connections to Karen's manipulated environmental reports from her past. Rod, realizing that Karen had been using his feelings for her, also turned his back on her. The legal consequences for Karen unfolded over the next few months in what the local newspaper called the Skunk Scandal. What started as a simple trespassing charge quickly evolved into something much more serious once James Peterson's evidence was submitted to the authorities. The district attorney's office filed multiple charges against Karen, including fraud, conspiracy to commit real estate fraud, falsification of HOA records, and breach of fiduciary duty. Evergreen Development found itself under intense scrutiny as well, with 3 executives eventually charged as co-conspirators in the scheme to artificially depress property values in Ashland Meadows. I attended every court hearing, sitting quietly in the back of the courtroom as Karen's case proceeded through the legal system. She hired an expensive attorney from the city, but the evidence against her was overwhelming. The prosecution presented a detailed timeline showing how Karen had systematically targeted homeowners who refused to sell to Evergreen, using her position as HOA president to make their lives miserable until they gave in. Financial records revealed she had received nearly $170,000 in consulting fees from Evergreen over the past 3 years, all unreported income that also led to tax evasion charges. Perhaps the most damning evidence came from Karen's own emails, where she openly discussed with Evergreen executives which homes to target next. The Scott property is prime real estate with that extra corner lot, she had written just 2 weeks after I moved in. I'll find a way to make him sell by summer. Another email detailed her strategy. I've found that if you hit them with at least 1 violation notice per week, most homeowners break within 3 months. The wildlife lover might be tougher, but everyone has a breaking point. In the end, Karen accepted a plea deal rather than risk a trial. She pleaded guilty to 4 felony counts and received a sentence of 18 months of house arrest, 5 years of probation, and was ordered to pay restitution to all the homeowners who had sold their properties to Evergreen under duress, a total of nearly $700,000. As part of the plea agreement, she was permanently barred from serving in any HOA leadership position or working in real estate in any capacity. Evergreen Development faced even steeper penalties, including a $3 million fine and the forced dissolution of their company. The day of Karen's sentencing, I ran into Rod outside the courthouse. He looked both relieved and ashamed. I had no idea it went so deep, he confessed, unable to meet my eyes. I thought she just cared about the neighborhood, making it perfect. I never knew about the kickbacks or the targeting. I believed him. Rod had been manipulated just like the rest of us, perhaps even more so because of his feelings for Karen. He had agreed to testify against her in exchange for immunity from prosecution for his minor role in the trespassing incident. She used all of us, he said quietly, but especially me. What happened next surprised me. Rod, who had once been Karen's most devoted follower, became an advocate for neighborhood reconciliation. He organized community meetings where people could share their stories of Karen's harassment, creating a kind of collective healing process. It turned out that many residents had felt isolated in their struggles, believing they were the only ones being targeted. These sessions revealed the true extent of Karen's manipulation and helped restore a sense of trust among neighbors who had grown suspicious of one another during her reign. Rod also volunteered to help with the wildlife habitat project that Mrs. Patel had initiated as interim HOA president. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The man who once stood beside Karen as she fought against my skunk rehabilitation was now helping build nesting boxes for local birds and plant native flora to attract beneficial insects. I joined him one Saturday morning to install a bat house, designed to help control the mosquito population naturally. "I think I needed this," Rod admitted as we worked, "to feel like I'm making up for some of the damage she caused, that I helped cause." In one final, desperate attempt, Karen tried to sabotage the skunk release event by falsely reporting to animal control that I was illegally trafficking wildlife. Officer Turner, who had been monitoring the situation, quickly clarified the matter and prevented any unnecessary intervention. When confronting Karen one last time, I didn't show anger but instead offered to help her eliminate the skunk odor with a special formula from Sam, an unexpected gesture of kindness that left Karen confused. The skunk release was a success, witnessed by many neighbors and a local film crew, turning it into a community educational event about wildlife conservation. My YouTube channel about wildlife exploded in followers after I posted the video about my entire story with Karen and the skunks, titled, "Karen hid in my cellar to spy on me, didn't know it was full of skunks in mating season." Karen, after realizing that she had become an internet phenomenon and the subject of countless memes, decided to sell her house and move elsewhere. Before leaving, she left a brief apology note for me. A small sign of change, though perhaps only because she wanted to avoid more negative attention. The aftermath of the scandal brought unexpected positive changes to Ashland Meadows. Under Mrs. Patel's leadership, the HOA underwent a complete transformation. The old restrictive covenants were reviewed and many were eliminated or modified to be more reasonable. A new commitment to transparency meant that all HOA meetings were recorded and made available to residents, and financial records were audited quarterly by an independent firm. Most significantly, a new rule was instituted requiring a supermajority vote for any major changes to neighborhood regulations, ensuring that no single person could ever again wield the kind of unilateral power that Karen had. The neighborhood itself began to change physically as well. With the threat of commercial development removed, residents felt free to personalize their homes in ways that had been forbidden under Karen's regime. Gardens bloomed with native plants rather than the uniform non-native landscaping that had been mandated. Solar panels appeared on several roofs, and a community garden was established on a vacant lot that Evergreen had previously purchased. There was even talk of creating a small nature sanctuary on the outskirts of the neighborhood, with educational signage about local wildlife, including, yes, skunks. My own reputation in the community shifted dramatically. Where I had once been viewed with suspicion as the new guy who might threaten property values, I was now something of a local hero. Neighbors would stop by to ask for wildlife advice or to report sightings of interesting creatures in their yards. Several families even asked me to speak at their children's schools about conservation and coexistence with wildlife. The irony wasn't lost on me that Karen's attempt to drive me out had instead cemented my place in the community. 6 months after the skunk incident, Ashland Meadows had become a more cohesive community under Mrs. Patel's leadership. The HOA now had more environmentally friendly regulations and even sponsored a small community project to create safe habitats for local wildlife. As for Karen, I heard she moved to a new neighborhood in another state, one without an HOA. And according to Rod, who had surprisingly become a friend, she had even adopted a cat from a local animal rescue shelter. As for me, I continued my work with wildlife and my YouTube channel reached 1 million subscribers. And yes, occasionally I still see that family of skunks visiting my backyard garden. I named the lead one Karen Jr., a humorous reminder that sometimes justice comes in the most fragrant ways. If you enjoyed this true story of neighborhood drama and sweet-smelling justice, make sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel for more wildlife adventures, some involving actual wild animals and others involving the most dangerous species of all, the suburban HOA president. And if you have your own story of neighborhood wildlife encounters or HOA nightmares, Share them in the comments below. Until next time, this is Finn Scott reminding you that sometimes the best defense against toxic people is a family of skunks in mating season.